Hey everyone, so a little while ago I had the chance to go and play the Dark Souls 2 TGS demo, and I took that chance. I bought 2 tickets to the EB Games Expo, and I managed to get about an hour with the game overall. On one of those days I was even able to record a playthrough, and this is it, that's what you're seeing. I know the footage looks like it was recorded with a potato, but trust me, the game itself looks great. It was running on a PlayStation 3, and graphically speaking, it's really amazing what they're able to squeeze out of the consoles at this point. Anyway, we should talk about graphics later. I'm going to try and commentate over the footage. So right now you see me attempting a parry, and that's something we should talk about. So parrying has changed. When you press the button down, there's a half-second delay before you perform the parry itself. So now you have to actually predict when an enemy's attack is going to connect. You might think this would make things harder, but it's really not that bad. I managed to get parries without too much trouble, and I think this is actually because the parry window itself is a little bit more forgiving. So another thing you'll have noticed when I parried that guy back there is that when I parried him he fell flat on his back. This is actually looking like a really effective method of crowd control. Bear in mind that we know 2 things. 1, enemies come at you more in packs now. Taking one of them out with a parry and dealing with it later, that sounds like a really viable strategy. And 2, you can now get damaged while you're performing the riposte, so knocking an enemy flat with a parry and dealing the riposte a little later when you have better positioning is an interesting change. So once the enemy is flat on his back, you perform the riposte. All of which look amazing, by the way. Everyone I've seen so far with every weapon looks pretty damn sweet. So right here you'll notice that I'm taking out 2 enemies. These guys were initially lying down pretending to be dead. There were so many ambushes in this level, so many enemies pretending to be dead that would come at you later in the level. Anyway, you'll notice I took them out with my short sword, but I actually attacked each one individually instead of trying to cleave them both with one swing, and that's because there's a new change to cleaving, I think. The ability to damage more than one enemy with one swing. With my huge sword you'll notice I did a cleave that damaged both enemies, but this doesn't actually seem to be possible with the short sword. I'm pretty sure you can only hit one enemy at a time with a small weapon swing, which is an interesting change. We know that strength weapons were underpowered in Dark Souls, and this seems to be just one of the many ways in which strength weapons seem to be getting a buff. And speaking of things that get a buff, this bow was really great, but have a listen to what happens here.
Oh, what? It's pretty good.
What is
The bow. Oh, shit!
So these guys will surprise you. They have these running attacks where they run at you and keep running, only stopping when they're able to swipe at you, and that's what happened there. They're really hard to deal with in melee. Killing them as a mage was easy, so I assumed the bow would be a good choice, and it works pretty damn well. Combat with the bow has definitely changed. As you can see, loosing an arrow consumes stamina now. Arrows travel faster than 1 mile per hour, and arrows are able to be loosed in quick succession, while moving. Also, first-person aiming felt a lot more accurate. It wasn't as jumpy as it is in Dark Souls. And all of this simply points to bow builds being a really viable way to complete the game. So now as I venture back into the dark, take note of how amazing that lighting looks. And this is on PS3 too, remember? Just look at those shadows, man, awesome. A few notes about the environment here. This guy throws firebombs which can blow open parts of the environment. You see those black barrels to the left there? There's a little shortcut there that a friend found. It saves you a lot of risks and takes you straight to a bonfire. I didn't take it this time though. I wanted to play through this bit. This next section can be really quite tricky. So I've been thinking about it for a while, and this demo really was quite perfect. I mean, level design was pretty clever. It's the small things that matter. Little things like placing a door here means that you won't be able to run past enemies as easy. Enemies have sprinting animations now, and they can kill you while you're opening a door. In fact, they can kill you while you're doing pretty much every animation. There's a lot of narrow areas where you had to actually kill things in your way to progress. If you didn't kill them, then they'd come at you later while you're bottlenecked in another area. And in Dark Souls it was really easy to run past enemies if you'd played for a long time. I have a feeling it's going to be harder this time around. Another thing is the choice of enemies. So these soldier enemies, they were quite easy so that anyone at the convention could play, but there were so many ambushes true to the style of a Souls game. Also, it's worth noting that the demo was loaded with life gems, which can be consumed over time to regain health. Almost every enemy dropped one, so it was pretty obvious that they were placed there just to make the demo easier. I doubt they'll be that abundant in the final version. In fact, it's actually hard to say how much of this will even be in the final version. Always keep in mind when you're judging Dark Souls 2 footage. Remember that we're like 5 months out from the actual release. A lot can change. Alright, so right now we're taking out these 2 guys with this amazing sword. I have to say I love this sword. I love how strength weapons are shaping up in general. I mentioned that they seem to be the only weapons with a cleave now, but there's a few other things. For example, remember in Dark Souls when you got hit by an enemy while you were shielding, you took damage to your stamina bar? Well, in Dark Souls 2, guard breaking, it's going to be a really big deal. So when you increase your strength stat in Dark Souls 2, you'll do more stamina damage to an enemy or an enemy player who is shielding. What this basically means is that strength weapons will break guards much more easily. And wait for it, you remember resistance, that useless stat in Dark Souls? Well, it's making a comeback. Increase your resistance stat, and you lose less stamina from blocking. Awesome, right? It might actually be useful this time around. So, this was a scary part in the demo. This guy comes running at me and I only just roll out of the way. Here I run into the dark and I start cheesing him with arrows. I'll cut that bit out. So here we'll talk about backstabs for a second. This guy hits me a while, and you'll notice enemies still are susceptible to backstabs. But they only seem to be susceptible to backstabs when they've finished attacking, when they've messed up, when you've baited them into a backstab. That's when you can backstab. If you just try to fish for a backstab, you won't have that much success. So right now I chase down the final red phantom. This guy has a ton of health, and he does more damage than a regular Turtle Knight. He was pretty hard to take out, but like everything else in this demo, it's about picking the right time to attack and having good movement. Combat feels different, but in more subtle ways. Let me explain. You'll notice, for example, enemies haven't been bouncing back off my shield. In addition to this, enemy attacks flow really well. It's not like they attack and then stop, which was common in Dark Souls. No, the enemies we've seen in this demo, they'll attack you with a flowing moveset with 3 or 4 strikes that are more difficult to predict. If you get caught by one of these strikes, you'll likely get hit by the rest. In addition to this, remember invincibility frames in Dark Souls? In Dark Souls you had 1 frame in which you were invincible while rolling. Well, they're still in Dark Souls 2, but I'd say that your invincibility frames are about 2/3 as small this time around. Definitely a bit harder to get. All of this means movement is more important, which reflects another change I noticed. I played every class, and some of them had way more fluid movement than others. Rolling was incredibly fast on the dual swordsman, and in addition, he moved more fluidly. Turning around was faster, running was faster, walking was faster, everything just felt smoother, and you had better control over your movement, and better control over an encounter with an enemy, which I think is going to be really important. With the Temple Knight, in contrast, rolling was slower, and so was overall movement. I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. There's a bigger emphasis on movement while managing multiple enemies this time around. Oh, and speaking of multiple enemies, this part was difficult. These 4 guys come at you with these combos that can easily take you out if you get hit by more than 2 at once. So I eventually decide that taking them on in this room, that's a really bad idea. They're much easier to handle if they're in a corridor where you can funnel them and hit multiple at once. And once again we see that great Souls level design where you use your environment to your advantage and use that to make things easier. I managed to capture about 18 minutes worth of footage, and all of it was pretty good. I'll only show you guys about 10 minutes of it here. I don't want to leak too much. Every time I played through though, I played through without too much trouble. Keep in mind that I played the demo a few times in the footage you've seen, so I've already memorized enemy locations and I had a slightly easier time than the first time I played. So, in closing, the difficulty was still there. I mean, me and a couple of friends played, and we managed to get to the Mirror Knight a couple of times, but all around us, not many people were fighting the Mirror Knight, and mostly you could just hear the sounds of people dying, so I assume it was fairly hard for everyone else. A friend got him to 20% health on his first try. I managed to get the Mirror Knight down on my second go. We faced him with this mage character first, which actually made the fight a little bit easier. But remember, as well as that, this was a demo loaded with life gems which you could use to heal yourself, and we don't even know if this will reflect the final game. Also remember that in this demo, the Mirror Knight didn't summon human players, he summoned NPCs. I couldn't figure out how to stop him summoning players, so if he's summoning real players, he's gonna be one hell of a boss. He summoned like 3 players average every time I fought him. It's gonna be a pretty intense fight if you're fighting real people instead of NPCs, I can tell you that much. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. I'm gonna leave you with my death against the Mirror Knight. I got overconfident at the end. I let him summon someone and let him live because I really wanted to parry him and show you what that would be like, but unfortunately I died. And that's a screen I'm gonna have to get used to seeing again. Anyway, later guys, I'll catch you next time. Dark Dark Souls 2 is shaping up to be a much more difficult game than its predecessor. Welcome again guys to Souls News. An embargo has just lifted on some more details about Dark Souls 2, and these are probably the best facts we've heard for a while. So sit back, relax, and let me share them with you. If you want to skip ahead to something more interesting, check the description. The three biggest pieces of news are as follows. 1.